Sam. I was going to say, can you repeat all that? Because there was a lot there, but I won't do that. I'm just having fun. All right, well, welcome, everybody. Again, as Sam mentioned, you should have an outline that is 38 pages long. That's what we're going to work through. That other document of questions and answers is something that I just like to prepare. I know I learn often by reading other people's questions, so we won't be going through those other Q&As. That's just some of the questions from previous webinars and things that I thought might be helpful, so it's kind of a bonus there. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's go to the table of contents and look through this just a little bit. You'll see there that there's about 38 pages of outline. We're going to spend about the first hour just going through the first 7-8 pages. What HMDA applies to, what it doesn't apply to. I can tell you that HMDA is a lot like fitting round pegs into square holes. It's different than most other regulations. Most other regs, we can get a question and then go find a specific answer, regulatory or citation, commentary, memos, etc. When it comes to HMDA, you've just got to understand the whole picture, and then you apply this logic or theory. And actually, that's why I like HMDA. It drives me nuts, but it's something that makes you think through. So we're going to talk through those 7-8 pages in great detail, and then the remaining 26, 27 pages is more of what you do now that you know you have HMDA applicable loan. Down at the very bottom, there's also a bullet that says everything in italics is, I'm quoting from a regulatory source, might be the regulation itself, but straight from the horse's mouth, if you will. So turn to page 1 with me, if you would. And if you look at Roman numeral 2A, you'll see what I'm talking about. I am quoting. So at the end of 2A, you'll see in brackets there that this is section 1003.2. That's where you can go to dig for more information. So whenever you see a citation, a quote, I'll tell you where it came from. And my philosophy is never believe me. You can go look it up yourself. So when you see non-italics, I like to joke, I'm just making that stuff up. Anyway, but let's get into this now. I'm trying to put it in plain English. What's the purpose of HMDA? You need to understand this. This is a fair lending regulation, and fair lending is hot right now, if you didn't know that already. Now, it's a carving out of just certain types of loans and applications, and that's what we'll go through here in a little bit. But it's really, this is sad the way I say it, but you're handing them rope to hang you with. You're handing the regulators and the consumer activists this information so that they can then say, well, we think you're discriminating illegally. And that's where you want to be careful that garbage in, garbage out, and they want accurate information, and that is taken very seriously. So let's look at Roman numeral 2 here. Who's got to play by this game? You're a covered institution if you have assets in excess of a certain threshold that gets adjusted every year. In 2013, that is $42 million. And you have a home or branch office in a metropolitan statistical area, a metropolitan area. So I like to say there's 2 ways to get out of HMDA. One is to sell assets to get below the threshold, and the other one is to close the offices in metropolitan areas. And I hope you're laughing with me. Some of you might be taking that serious and thinking about it now, but there are some ways to get out. It may not be practical for you. Letter B, what's an application? Now, please pick up your pens. I like to tell you some things and have you write them down, because when you write them down, you engage a different part of your brain than when you're listening or seeing. If you write this down, you're more likely to remember it. HMDA is an application regulation. That's what I want you to write down. It's an application regulation. It applies to applications for these 3 types of loans: home purchase, home improvement, and refinancings, and we're going to define that. It doesn't matter for applicability whether you make the loan, deny the loan, it's withdrawn, closed for incompleteness. If someone comes in and applies for these 3 types of loan that meet these definitions, then it is going to go on your HMDA LAR one way or another. And now how it gets reported can depend on what you do with it, make it, deny it, withdraw it, etc. And the definition of application really is verbatim and mirrors what Reg B talks about. It's an oral or written request, and that's a whole other webinar that I spend 2 hours on. But it's a request. It's not a piece of paper. It doesn't, maybe it does have to meet certain criteria, but it could be verbal or in writing for these 3 types of loans. Okay, so what do you mean by these types of loans? Well, hang on to that. It also has to be basically for a dwelling. Now, let's look at that in real good detail. Letter C there on page 1. A dwelling means someone dwells or resides there. And they give you a little bit more specific. It's got to be in the U.S. or Puerto Rico. So if we're, making a vacation home in Canada or Mexico or something like that, it doesn't meet this definition. But it's much broader than most of the other regs, like Truth in Lending, Reg Z, RESPA, Equal Credit. It is not limited to 1 to 4 family. It's not just primary dwellings like right of rescission. It can be condominiums. It can be mobile homes without the land. And if you look at the second paragraph, the commentary says that, therefore, we got vacation homes, rental properties, multifamily apartment buildings, things like that. So much, much broader. Now, if you look at C1, there's an exemption. We're going to exempt out recreational types of housing, boats and campers. But you got to be careful. If I go to Seattle, I'll see a lot of houseboats that aren't recreational. They're where somebody lives. And so what is this thing? And let's stop there just a minute. My camper that I pull out on the weekends and, and spend a night here and a night there kind of thing, that's recreational. But don't consider all of those things that have wheels as recreational. I have an aunt that actually lives in about a $250,000 RV. Now, we call that a recreational vehicle, RV, but it's not. She doesn't have a home. She doesn't have a brick and mortar. And if you've seen the movie Vacation, she comes and stays until somebody kicks her out, and then she goes on to the next relative. That is her dwelling. So be careful in a sense, and that's, again, round pegs and square holes. Go down there to C1 on page 1, and it says transitory residence. And they give some examples like hotels, hospitals, dormitories, but basically those people live somewhere else. But again, let me give you this gets weird. My mother passed away about 6 years ago, but before she died, she actually moved to this retirement village. And this village had like duplexes around the outside. Those people lived there full time. Those were residences, dwellings. Inside of that circle was like an apartment complex where it was a long-term, and these people basically had assistance from pharmacy and nurses and things like that. And they could choose to have a meal plan where they went to a cafeteria, or they had little kitchenettes. And I would say, that's like an apartment building, and that sounds like a dwelling. And then there was like a hospital wing that was more of a hospice care, people that were probably finishing out their life, and that was more of like a hospital that I would say is transitory. So imagine I come to your bank and I say, I want to buy that complex, that village. What is it? Well, it's transitory, it's apartment, and there's duplexes. And so you've got to come up with a way to say this place is a dwelling or it's not a dwelling. And it's a mixed-use property. And we'll come back to that a little bit. But you want to, and again, I want you to write this down, slam the door. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If you say, I don't think that's HMDA, and the examiner comes in and looks at that and says, well, I think it is, and you haven't explained yourself, you may be in an argument, and you may lose that argument. What you want to do is slam the door. And what I mean by that is document your logic and then be consistent. Now, the thing I just described, it's pretty tough to be consistent because there probably aren't a lot of those that your bank is going to be involved in. But you want to be consistent in how you apply your logic. Anyway, we'll come back to some of those examples, or maybe you have questions about some. I know there was one pre-submitted. But this is where HMDA, you just got to understand the big picture and then apply the logic. And again, slam the door. One more thing, I'm trying to give you some theory here, is most institutions have what I call a HMDA gatekeeper, or the HMDA queen, or the HMDA king, or whatever. Someone that is kind of passing judgment and saying yes or no to these, and here's how you report it. And if you don't have one of those, you need to point somebody to be one of those, because it's absolutely necessary. Because when you're going to be consistent, what that means is one person is applying the consistency. If you have every loan officer trying to make a judgment call, then you're going to be inconsistent on some of these things. And we're going to cover some stuff today where you can go.